It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen, and we are so sorry. We are going to go over the film of the Cowboys game.
What did I text you, man? I said, are we going to do a film review? Because I didn't really want to watch the film again.
No, you didn't. But here's how we're going to do this to make this, palatable, make it more relevant's a good word. Relevant's the correct word even. We're going to look at the offense through the lens of, like, how is Sam doing, right? That is the most important question. So what's the offense doing for Sam? What is Sam doing for the offense? As we start kind of the evaluation process of looking forward to the offseason and figuring out exactly what they've got in Ashburn for this team. Defensively, we're going to look at why they fired Jack Del Rio, for lack of a more delicate way to put that. But like, what are the problems that happened in Dallas that were the end of the snowball, where Ron Rivera decided afterwards, like, this is the end. We can't do this anymore. And in fact, Logan, because that is probably the bigger headline, let's start there. So they give up, over 400 yards. There's inevitability that there was to it. It just felt like no matter what, Dallas was going to score. There's no better example of this than their first touchdown drive. They start in the shadow of their own end zone. They complete this beautiful ball from Dak to Ferguson down the seam over the outstretched arms of Cody Barton. They pick up a couple of penalties on that drive. They overcome them. And it's one of those drives that, like, in net yardage, they might have had over 100 yards net yardage on that drive, because they have, penalty yards, and then they overcome that, and they ultimately wind up in the end zone. And that's the kind of day it was, and that's the kind of days that they've been having. So when you watch the tape, like, what more does it tell you than the sheer numbers and the production already told us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, gosh, man, where to start? So, like, in the first half of this game, man, like, I chart, I've said it every week, I chart red and green. Right. This is the most red that I've charted in the first half ever this season, right? It just, guys not in good position, guys not making plays, like, and it's tough, man. It was a tough watch in the first half, so there wasn't a lot of good there. And I just, it's funny because I don't think guys are. This is something interesting, and this is like one of the great paradoxes of watching this defense. Is I don't think the guys are bad. I think you've got good football players. I think you've got instinctive football players. I'm just, every time I'm watching it, I'm like, is this guy in a good position to be successful, right? So, like, we were texting a little bit over the weekend, and there's a play where it's, it's this duo run, right? And it looks like Casey's supposed to have outside contain, and then the guy runs for 8 yards. And to me, it's like, does he actually have outside contain here, or is it the safety? And if the safety's supposed to have outside contain, why is he playing so deep? And it's just this really weird, every play is kind of like that, where it's like, is this guy doing what he's supposed to do? Yes. And is he playing with correct technique? Maybe, but is that maximizing what he does? And I think, like, when you watch the first half, I thought on the first drive, they did a good job getting off the field on third down in the first quarter. Like, they got a little bit lucky, right? They had a overthrow by Dak, which kind of sets it up. But, 29 has a nice coverage on the first third down there where, he's in good phase. Everyone's covered up, and you're like, okay, there's a good man-to-man down. But then you go to the next play, and that's the sequence that starts that long drive, that 1st and 10. You talk about that Cody Barton play. First off, kudos to Dallas. Like, I just love when I see, like, fun offensive wrinkles. And again, we talked about how Dallas doesn't have, like, a ton of offensive wrinkles, but I thought this was pretty cool. Like, they get in, like, a kind of a bunch. It's a tight trips, and they run all go special, right? And what I love about it is they had the slot receiver act like he's crossing, and so Cody has to settle for a second because the eyes are on this crossing route, and then that guy kind of bounces back out and runs the vertical seam, and it's enough to get Cody out of phase with the tight end. And again, Dak delivers a perfect ball, but love that.
And he's not even that far out of phase. Like, that's one of those where it's like, it seems like a Commander special where it's the ball's 1 inch over a guy's head, and Dak just puts that ball in a perfect trajectory, because if he lofts it, like, the safeties are there, Cody's in good position. If it underthrow, it's a pick. And instead, it just perfectly in the tight end's arms.
Yeah, and I think we talked about Cody right there. Like, obviously that's a tough play for him, but I think a guy, we talk about guys building for the future or guys that had good games. Like, Cody was a guy that stood out to me as a guy that played really well. I thought he did some really good stuff in coverage. You know, he's a good phase with receivers. I thought he made some nice fits in the run game. So I think a guy that deserves a little bit of a shout out as a guy that played consistent football and was graded pretty well by PFF. So I feel comfortable kind of saying that. The next play, golly, we could do this all day, but the next play is frustrating, right? They're in a cover 2. They've got a 7-man box. It's an 8-man blocking surface. In those blocking surfaces, when you are playing 2, usually you do some type of scrape. You do like because you're accounting for, you're short a gap, right? If you have 8 blockers and 7 defenders, you're short a gap. So what they'll do is they'll stunt the D-line, and then they'll position the linebackers in a way where you're trying to get that will linebacker to be free. And so they run like basically a lead with the fullback, and Jamin thinks he's got to spill it to Cody, but Cody also spills the fullback. They're both hitting the fullback essentially, and then the back bounces it out. So it's like somebody screwed that up. I don't know if Jamin's supposed to pick the fullback and Cody's supposed to scrape, or Jamin's supposed to pick the fullback, Cody's supposed to scrape, and then Kalik is supposed to scrape all the way over the top. I don't know, but again, that's a classic example of what are you supposed to be doing? Because I can see shades of a correct thing here, but obviously it's not the correct thing. And I think that's something you and I talked about quite a bit is there just too much in? Like, because, you know, they're in cover 2, they run cover 3, they play a little bit of man, they play 6. And are you just not maximizing those downs, you know, because you've got too much stuff going on? And I just feel like every single play until the third quarter had shades of that going on with it. So.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the thing where, to me, it does reflect back on coaching, as opposed to like, oh, these players just aren't whatever. And you know, this is a bit of a sidebar, but we're going to take it real quick. I actually think that we have crossed a Rubicon of talk about this defense that is wrong. Like, I think people have gone from, at the beginning of the year, this is a talented group that's underperforming. Why can't they get more out of this team? To like, actually, we overrated the talent. This team, there's not actually that many good players on this defense. And I just think that's wrong.
Yeah.
Because like, I don't think John Allen is suddenly not a very good football player, not an impactful football player when used correctly. Daron Payne, same thing. Like Jamin Davis, I think is shown that he's a very productive football player when he's in good positions. I don't think Benjamin St-Juste can't play in the NFL. He can't be a number 1 corner in the NFL in this scheme, that's for sure. But like, they've taken players who we know have talent, who we know are good, and made them so that they're not like, they're negatively productive, so that they actively hurt the team. And so I think that's what I'm so fascinated by these next couple of weeks, to kind of finish the sidebar before we get back to, this game, is if Ron super simplifies the scheme and it's like, let's get aligned, let's make sure everyone is clear on like one thing they're supposed to do, or 2 things, a pass responsibility and a run responsibility, very, very clear, go play. And we might not have all the best answers for everything, but at least everyone will be on the same page. I want to see how many guys played better. Because that is really what these last couple of weeks are about, is like, how do you evaluate the talent that you have? And I think in order to do that, you have to allow them to play fast and free. Now, I think part of the evaluation for the next, GM and the next personnel group is like, okay, well, we know we can't put them in something super complex. Like, there are certain guys who can't handle it. And as they talk to players and kind of understand what happened, that's going to be part of the discussion. But I also just wonder, like, did the coaching staff not respond to a couple of key guys in key places who messed up the communication, or who couldn't handle the bigger load compared to some of the guys that have been here in the past? Or was it coached so poorly from a detail standpoint that you have a bunch of confusion? And to get back to the tape, like there's a play that happens. Was it Jamin, the one that you sent me that it was Jamin, where it's like, they want him to do this, it would seem, but also based off alignment and where his eyes are supposed to go, he should be going the other way.
Right.
And it's like, sure, if afterwards on tape, if you're like, hey man, you need to back off into this slant throwing window, but during the install period, it's like, hey, because you have a 4 week on this side, your eyes need to be going here.
Right. And
you taught him 2 different things at different times. No wonder guys are confused. And that's what it feels like has happened a lot. I know that was long-winded, but I hope people understand that the main takeaway here is that you do have talented players. But they were often put in conflicting situations or unclear situations, and that is why ultimately Jack Del Rio is not here.
Yeah, and I think I think that's a great point. I think when you watch Dallas, it's like Dallas's defense. It's the total opposite of what the Commanders' defense is. It's a group that they're extremely confident. And, are they always playing with perfect technique? Do they drop guys in coverage? Yeah. But they're playing fast. They're playing confident. They know what they're doing. They know what their defensive identity is. And I think maybe the most important thing coming out of this game is that coverage group is so incredibly tied with the rush. It's like they're inseparable. And I think they trust the rush so much in Dallas because they can, right? That's the group that's number one in pressures in the NFL, right? They got guys like Micah Parsons. And you say, well, why are they so good? It's not Micah Parsons winning one-on-ones down in and down out. It's Dan Quinn and that defensive staff. I don't want to give Dan all the credit because I don't know how it goes there. But I know Dan's a smart guy. I know he's a former defensive line coach. And they are constantly looking for matchups and games and ways to create pressure with 4, with 5, with matchup, that there's a hunger and a desire. And we've talked about that passion for perfection with regards to Kyle's offense and how they hunt for angles in the run game, or McDaniels. I started my Miami prep last night, and it's a scary proposition, man, because that group they're starving for maximizing their guys. And when you watch Dallas, you see that. And I think that's something that I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and I think Micah Parsons is excellent. I think he's an excellent football player. But I am pretty confident that if you put him in this scheme, I don't know if he's like a 15 sack guy. I think he might be a 9 to 11 sack guy. Because when you just say, hey, win a one-on-one versus, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, name your tackle, it doesn't happen. Even when you watch Nick Bosa, I do a lot of D-line study. When you watch Nick Bosa and you're saying, hey, win a one-on-one versus Lane Johnson, he doesn't do it because Lane Johnson's that good. But the reason Micah gets so many advantages, he's lined up against Tyler Larson for 20% of his snaps today. Oh, he's lined up against Chris Paul for a couple. Oh, he's on a crazy looping stunt where he's completely unblocked. That passion allows them this great coverage dexterity in the back end. And there are times in this game where we have to call attention to the fact that the coverage is good. There's a play, I think it's the third quarter. Kendall Fuller's in 2-man. It's 3rd and 11 or 3rd and 12. He undercuts the dig. He plays the 2-man perfectly. The rush doesn't get home. Dak extends the play. The receiver uncovers it, ends up being a big play, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, Kendall's terrible, blah, blah, blah. But that's the rush. That's not being disciplined with the rush. And I think that, even when the coverage was good, winning coverage, the rush wasn't there. And I can't be mad at the rush because they are literally hey, line up in the same position every single time and rush the passer. And I just think that's an unrealistic expectation in the NFL. Look at all the teams with top flight pass rushers. Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Nick Bosa, name your guy. They are finding ways to maximize those guys, right? They play techniques. They play a defensive scheme that allows them to be aggressive. And you mentioned, Payne and Allen and all these guys. I think there's a reason that they're not being overly successful is because they're literally just it's win this one-on-one, win it. And if you can't win it, what are we paying you for? And I don't think that's entirely fair. And so I think that to me was the big, seeing Dallas do it.
The lack of pressure was crazy in this game. This was probably the worst pass rush game that they've had. And they've had some ineffective games, but there's been New England, I don't hold against them because while Mac is terrible at basically everything else, he gets rid of the ball quickly.
And they were pretty good about creating pressures in the context of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Here it just felt like Dak had a full pocket all day. I mean, they had 14 pressures in the game by PFF's number. That's nothing. Yeah. That's nothing when you watch week to week in this league.
And I think the other thing you see there is there's not a lot of third downs. There's not a lot of third and longs. There's not a lot of opportunities for them to rush. And so you get guys there's a play where they're in drop 8 and Casey Tuhill's in a 4-eye. Andre Jones is in a 4-eye and they're looping out into this drop 8. And so there's no conceivable way that I expect them to win a rush where they're lined up over the guard. They got to get outside the tackle and then start their rush. That's just, they're not going to win, right? And whoever's playing nose is not going to win because the second those guys leave, they're going to double team down on the nose and you're going to have this beautiful pocket. And that's what happens. And I think that's something that really, you know, Ron said in his presser, he's like, we're going to try and find ways to create more pressure with 4, get better angles with 4. And I think there's something to that. Like, I also coach offensive line. And one of the things that's tough about line stunts is you coach this pass protection angle. And when you deviate the angle, that's when it gets really complicated, you know, when I'm changing my approach. And they just don't do that a lot here. And it's tough. And we talked about this in the preview show. One of the things that's really definitive to me is that this offensive line is good. They are good in Dallas.
Yeah.
And so what happens when you get a good offensive line is you got to do something to elevate. And I thought there were some times where they made good pressures. Jamin Davis did an excellent job blitzing, creating pressure, but she did it 3 times out of 54 snaps. And that's just not effective, I don't think. So I think that was the big takeaway from me is we can go through every single play, but there's going to be plays where you're like, man, coverage was good, rush was bad, or the rush was good, coverage was bad. And they just never got synced and it was so nice to watch Dallas, to watch how they do it, because you're like, that's the gold standard for how these groups should be working together.
Yeah. So I do wonder, maybe we'll spend a little bit more time on this on Thursday, but like, how creative does Ron get? We know simplifying is going to be the main thing that he does, but like at this point in the season, like I'd mess around with John Allen to outside. Like I would be like, okay, hey, you're one of our best rushers. Like, let me get you outside. You played a little bit of that at Alabama. Like, and we don't have premier pass rushers, you know, because we traded away Chase and Montez. So let's put John Allen outside with Big Phil and Duron inside opposite of Casey. Like let's play with stuff and see if we can mess up a D line or an offensive line. And especially against a team like Miami that's going to run it. Like, let's get better run players on the field. Obviously, there's a speed element and, you know, there's matchups and there's a million things to consider. But, like, they've just got to do something different. And, you know, maybe that idea actually sucks. But, like, the fact that they just tried the same thing all year, it seems like, and expected different results is, I think, what drives me so nuts. And, you know, there's a little bit of this, too, where it's like, okay, Ron clearly has some different ideas. And maybe some of this is because he's got to call it now, and, you know, he doesn't know the defense as well as Jack did, because when Ron got here, for those that forgot, like, they installed Jack's defense, not Ron's defense, and so they're going to simplify it down so he can call it nevertheless, so it's simpler for the players. But it's like, at some point, why, you know, Ron should have stepped in and done some different stuff, or maybe they did make changes, and, you know, Ron was like, oh, that's a good idea, try it, Jack, and it didn't work. But it just felt like they never really adapted. They started to blitz a little bit more after they traded the 2 edge guys, but like by and large, they just kind of expected it to work eventually. And maybe that's because in the past that's happened, but it just didn't ever click this year. And now, you know, I guess you say, hey, we'll try it with someone else in charge and someone else coaching the DBs and hope that we have better results, or at least we can get a cleaner evaluation in these final 5 games than what we've had, because what we've had is a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I think like that's and it doesn't even, to me, it doesn't even need to be that complicated. Like I started my Miami prep last night, and I was watching Miami. They're second in the NFL in unblocked pressures, and I was like, they don't blitz a lot. Or Vic Fangio doesn't blitz a lot. He blitzes lots on third down, but not a ton. And a lot of their pressures are just off of like TTs. You know, they got Wilkins inside and they just pick the center. They loop the other guy around. They get a double team on Wilkins. And they get a free runner to the quarterback. And that's what New York did with Dexter Lawrence. Like, it doesn't need to be rocket science. Like, there's stuff that Dallas does with 4, which I thought was beautiful. Like, they did an ET with Micah Parsons, right? They loop him around, and it looks like he's trying to rush the A gap. But instead of rushing the A gap, he picks the center, and the backside shade just loops around him and runs free to the quarterback. It looks like he's an unblocked blitzer. Like, that's how clean it was. And it's just sometimes just messing with those patterns on third down and repping those things gives you advantages in terms of lines and approach, and you don't even need to move guys around. Now, the question is, like, you can tell Dallas, like, lives and breathes that, and they really do an excellent job of coaching that. Can you get that level of timing and cohesion in basically an extended bye week? And the answer is I don't know. So, you know, it seems like something that they should have been working on potentially this whole offseason. And I know they do stuff like that in training camp, but it seems kind of like maybe a little bit of an afterthought at this point for them. But, you know, can you get to stuff like that on a little bit of an extended like time in terms of prep? Maybe. And I think they probably should explore all options in terms of finding ways to just help those guys out, you know?
For sure. What about the back end? Because obviously, like, it's so frustrating because, Visselmeyer, the Harris to Visselmeyer drop-off seems rather apparent. They also happened to draft in the first and second rounds DBs at a position that was not well coached this year. But from kind of if you're trying to coach some finer points and get some things detailed up and also help with play calling to make things easier to execute, like what options are on the table and what was exposed in this game?
Yeah, I think obviously like the main thing is what we talked about is that like when the rush isn't with the coverage, like just again, Dallas, right? The reason Bland has 6 pick sixes or whatever he has is because he trusts that when you run an out, there's not going to be an out and up. There's not enough time. So he breaks on the out and he's going to pick that ball off. And these guys, they haven't had that luxury in the back end all year. So they are playing true man for long periods of time, which is very, very challenging. And that's not an excuse for them. That's just like stating a fact, right? And then there's opportunities like where you're playing in these man situations and there's certain routes that I don't care. Like, so for example, they're running a sprint out to the right. And I think people get on Benjamin St-Juste for this, right? And CeeDee Lamb acts like he's selling a go. He works, Benjamin St-Juste works with a go. It's a quick snap down. The ball is out before Benjamin even gets his head around. It's a first down. That is not a situation, if you're in man-to-man a lot, that I expect you to win. As a receiver, especially playing off man, I've talked to Tan about this quite a bit. When you're in man, like I like it. I want man coverage because you're by yourself. And the more you're by yourself, the more I can prep myself as a receiver to win. And the more as a coordinator, I can prep myself to beat man coverage. And there's a reason people in the NFL, defensive coordinators, run such a low percentage of man-to-man coverage now. Because it's pretty easy to beat because the offensive players and the timing of it is so high level. The quarterbacks are so good. And so, like I said, I think they had some downs where you're like, man, Quan, that's excellent coverage on CeeDee Lamb on this choice route. Like that is big time elite level stuff. But also we get that kind of inside stem work back out for the corner for the touchdown. And I say to myself, like that took so long because the rush wasn't getting there. So while Quan needs to be better, the rush isn't there, right? Then there's the jolt for the touchdown to Cook, right? Where, again, we talked about on the phone. That's a play that everybody runs in the league, and it works when you have guys, young, inexperienced safeties, or when you cut crossers, and he looks like he's selling the corner. Percy gets a little bit wide, and they cross his face. And so, did I think Percy did some really good stuff this game? Yeah, man. He did some really good stuff. In conjunction with what he's done the past 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm like, he's trending in the right direction. He got beat on that. And that's a young football player not understanding what can hurt you and how he needs to play a certain coverage. And I'm going to put that on him, but I'm also like, is the coach telling him the correct thing? Or does the coach say, hey, man, anytime you get that roll action, think corner. I want you to break to the corner. And he's breaking to the corner, and then Dak sits up. And I don't know what he's being coached to do. But those are the types of details that I think we're talking about where that's bad. But is it bad because of what he's being told? Is it bad because of his inexperience? Because you also see him make a great play in Tampa too, where he breaks up the ball to the tight end over the middle of the field, like makes an outstanding football play, like breaks on the ball, great job. And it's like, great. You see those high levels, but it's the inconsistency of it. And I think that's, to me, the back end that's so frustrating. Even St-Juste, I thought, had a really nice man-to-man situation on some go stuff with CeeDee Lamb and some tight area stuff. It's so funny. All the incomplete passes, all the times where Dak holds the ball a little long and throws it away, coverage is pretty good. But it's so hard for them to hold that down in and down out because they're playing so much man. So I think that group definitely needs to play better. I'm not trying to absolve them of anything.
Yeah, but it's how can the coaches call it to make them play better outside of just being like, hey, man up and play better. And if they can get in more, I would say, simple shell zone coverages, and especially this weekend against Miami, like cover 2, cover 4 all freaking day. I don't care if they know, just we need dudes deep.
But I think, like, to your point, like, what can we own? You know, like, and I think, like, when you're watching, like, for example, that Jamin Davis play that we were just talking about, where they have 4 to the weak side, right?
Yeah, so they're under center, fullbacks in the game. There's 4 players to the weak side of the formation.
So that's the strength. It's the strength, and Jamin's the weak linebacker.
So 4 players to the strong side of the formation. You got 2 receivers, a tight end, fullback, and then you got 1 wide receiver over to Jamin's side, split out, and he's on that weak side of the formation.
and the back works the left, right? So now that's 4 week, right? Because the fullback's over there, the two receivers are over there, and the receiver and the tight end and the back's over there. So based on the rules that they've played all year, it's like his eyes go with the back, which is what you'd expect him to do. And he's looking for a crosser coming back. In cover 3 or cover 2 or whatever coverage we're deciding to play, can we make sure we understand what we're getting in these certain looks? Can we make sure we own it? Can we make sure, hey, Cody, you can lock this crosser because I'm going to buzz this slant or whatever it is, right? And those things, when it's a little bit simpler, allow them to be a little bit more clear. Because if you think about it, defenses have to adjust to literally everything the offense does. And the more defenses that you put in, you are just multiplying the adjustments you need, right? Because like, let's say on that play, for example, they're in cover 3. There's an adjustment in cover 3 that we want. Let's say they're in man. There's an adjustment in man that we want. Let's say they're in cover 2. There's an adjustment in cover 2. And so if I have 5 coverages in, I have to have 5 different adjustments for that one play that the offense puts in. So I think to your point, if they can find something, a defensive identity, let's say, that's outside of this just straight man coverage, I think it's going to be like you're going to have to play man. Like you're going to have to play it at some point. I'm not saying you can't. You can never play man, but just limiting the frequency with which you're doing it and limiting the situations to stuff where you can win in man-to-man situations. You know, we got a pressure on. Let's play man or whatever that looks like. So I think that's something that definitely I would expect Ron to make an adjustment with. And when you look at Ron in Carolina, and I know he wasn't calling the defense in Carolina, but they played a lot of cover 3 and they played a lot of man, you know, and like that was who they were. And I think getting back to something resembling that would probably be advantageous. And it's going to be a tough week to do it and be successful because, like I was texting you last night, like Miami is gross.
Yeah,
dude.
cover 2 sounds like a great idea until you realize it gives you a light box against Miami, and
they're going to make you look redonkulous.
But then the alternative is you play a bunch of cover 3, and then you have one high safety to deal with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So
dude,
I don't know
and
what's worse.
I know we're not prepping them, we're not previewing that right now, but watching him like get into the defense, both those guys, they get in. That team gets into the defense so fast. They can attack space so quickly because they've got 2 of the fastest guys in football. And you're just like, how do you cover this? Like heavy play action away. He's in this huge void. You're just like, it's tough. It's going to be a tough deal for sure. So we'll talk about that.
I joked
more.
with you last night. We were texting. I was like, it's a bold move for Ron to fire Jack now. You could have just waited one more week and let Miami destroy you. Because, you know, week one of Rivera calling the defense might be an ugly one because of who the opponent is. All right. That's enough on the defense. We'll obviously preview Miami coming up later in the week, and we'll see what kind of adjustments they make. But, yeah, more red plays than any other time this year. The snowball got too big. Rivera made the move. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Greg Hoffman here, Logan Paulson there. We together will be at Tap Sports Bar again on Sunday, MGM National Harbor Take Command pregame show. We're there starting at 10 a.m. on your radio and on YouTube. 106.7 The Fan, the Team 980. Doors open if you want to come hang out in person at 11. Okay, the offense, Logan. Let's look at it through the lens of the quarterback because that is so much of what this season is obviously about. How is Sam going in this offense? How is he growing? How is he elevating it? How is the offense elevating him? But, you know, even the red-green test, if you will, like, what'd you make of what they tried to do in a game where they don't wind up scoring that much?
Yeah, I think got to give credit to Dallas, man. That defense is good. We knew they were good. And you just see like how they create problems, you know. And I think that's the other thing is like there were probably more times than normal. So usually there's probably like 3 or 4 plays that I'll text you. I'm like, hey, do you think Sam can make this throw, or what do you think of this read? And I didn't do it this week, but I'd say there was probably like 7 to 9, you know, where you're like, hey man, like ball probably should be going here, you know. And I think and this is something that I think is going to be really interesting to watch because Sam did well against, you know, teams that have been struggling a little bit. You know, was very productive against like average football teams. Like the Dallas Cowboys are a playoff team. The Buffalo Bills are a playoff team, right? And so as the level of competition, as the defense improves, like can Sam continue to improve and match kind of the nuance and complexity that these groups are presenting? Because like it's tough, man. It's really, really tough. Like the first play of the game, it wasn't the first play. It's the first down of the game, and it ends up being a sack. And so basically what they're doing is they're running like a high cross from Terry, who's on the offensive right, and they're running like 2 posts. And so when you first watch it, you're like, man, you probably got to get the ball to Terry here. But then when you rewatch it again and you're like, man, they're kind of busting this coverage because the post, the outside post, which I think is Curtis, they basically drop him. Like the middle safety in cover 3 matches the inside post or the high cross, whatever you want to call that. And then he's running a post versus outside leverage to the middle of the field. And the middle of the field is wide open. And I'm like, holy cow, man, if this is protected, we're talking about 6 on the 4th play of the game. And now, I'm not saying Sam needs to make this throw, but this is more of a kind of, we're making a commentary on EB as well as Sam. Like, because everyone's like, oh, we need to get more explosive plays. And I look at this play and I'm like, this is the explosive play. And Sam can for sure make this throw. And also Terry's coming open because he's running to grass. Now, there's a little bit of a pressure, but can Sam anticipate the throw to Terry? It'd be tough. And if the protection holds up a little bit more, man, you're hitting your head on the goalpost. So that's one of those plays. And that's the 4th play of the game where you're like, there is a lot of potential in this play if the protection holds up. And I was talking to someone last night, talking to Grant Paulson actually, and one of the things I was thinking about is like, why doesn't this hit? Like, what's the difference between this and Kyle Shanahan? Because basically what they're doing in Kansas City and a little bit in Minnesota and here is they're running play action concepts from a drop back perspective, right? Because it allows the quarterback to keep their eyes on the field, on the coverage. And one of the things about play action stuff, especially the way Kyle runs it, is it allows you for, and the way Miami runs it, is it allows for better protection surfaces for the offensive line. So That's one thing where it's like concept's good, the time you're calling it is good, but are you maximizing the offensive line with the protection call? And that's something that I got to keep an eye on the rest of the year. But that's something I would say, if you get a different protection in here, this same concept, like that's a huge play for this offense. And so I'm not mad at Sam for missing it. I actually like that EB called it. I like that it's there and it's open, but I think like the execution of it is the thing that's going to leave you kind of wanting. And then the question is, can Sam elevate that concept by throwing that high cross to Terry, which is to me the secondary option, with a little bit of anticipation and getting you on the board there, if that makes sense. So those are the types of plays we're talking about in this game for Sam.
Well, you have that, and then you also have the reality of the offensive line. Like there was kind of that 2-week boost where when Larson and Paul came in, the protection was better, and it just feels like it's regressed back to what it was. And really the difference between this and earlier in the year is like Sam's better at dealing with it. So you're going from 9-10 sack games every week to 4 or 5 or 3 to 5 sack games. But the pressure's still there. Like Dallas got a ton of pressure in this game. And, sometimes you don't even realize it because Sam so quickly gets out and is able to make a play or sidearm this or whatever. But like, let's see, how many pressures do they 34 is the number that PFF has.
Plays.
Yeah.
Which is a lot.
That's an insane pressure percentage.
But that's what Dallas does. That's about 44%, which is what they are on the year.
Right.
Like that's what they're going to do.
And so, kudos to Dallas. But if you're looking at it from EB's perspective, it's like, how could we have prevented that? Could we have moved the pocket more? Could we have, hey, we like this concept. We run it typically out of drop back, but it's originally a play action concept. Let's go back to the original and let's try to get a little more protection that way. Obviously, game flow, they're never up in the game, so the run game is more hit or miss. In terms of calling it, you feel like you need to pass the ball a little bit more. They like to pass the ball a ton anyway. It's just hard. But I think the thing that, like the phrase that I was using
to that point, real quick, to that point, I think one of the things I'd also like to call attention to is especially like on the second drive of the game, like we mentioned the offensive line. I think they do a pretty good job, but there's a sequence where there's probably not consecutively, but let me see, it's the second drive of the game, and they're running. It's the first down of the game, and they're trying to take a shot, and it ends up being completion because Sam does a good job vacating the pocket. But there's a mental mistake on the pro. There's another play right where the ball's dropped, and then there's another mental mistake on the pro on the third down. And so, if I'm EB, I look at this and I say to myself, those should have been good plays. We didn't do mentally what we were supposed to be doing. And I think that's super frustrating because you look at those plays, and I highlighted them in orange this week just so I could see them. Whereas a coach, I would say, man, that ball to Terry probably gets completed there on the first down of the game if we're a little bit better at quarterback. And again, I'm asking Sam to do something great, right? But then I get to the next sequence that leads to the third down where we got a punt, and I'm saying to myself, man, we had 2 mental mistakes in protection and a drop, so like what do I, in terms of as a caller and as a teacher, I need to be better because I need to get that stuff clarified. But in terms of scheme, I think that's got to be really frustrating for EB and for the staff, because it's like that's an opportunity for us to get points potentially, and we didn't execute the way we need to execute. I think it's something that I would just also call attention to. So it's not just maximizing the play call, which I think is part of it, but it's also, there's times where, and this happens in every game, but I think decreasing the frequency of some of these mental mistakes and some of these issues is also very, very important.
Sure. And to Dallas's credit, when you have as much skill and apply as much pressure as Dallas does, both literal pressure on the quarterback, but also just like the pressure to perform well. Like if you're Tyler Larson or any of these linemen and you're lined up against Micah Parsons, he puts a lot of pressure on you because he's really freaking good. And DeMarcus Lawrence is really good. And like they've got a bunch of dudes who are really good. Their corners are good. So as a receiver, like it's a harder ask to actually execute well. That's the nature of playing good teams. I think the larger thing that I would say about this offense over the last couple of weeks, though, is that they don't feel threatening. And I think that to me is where I'm hoping over the final month of the season here, they can find a way to be threatening, because they can string together some decent drives. I mean, even early in this game, something that we talked about on the Instant Reaction show, I think, or maybe we were talking about this before one of those, but like they get into long field goal range and stall out, and Rivera decides to punt it on those first 2 drives or 2 of the first 3 drives. And it's just like, I don't agree with those decisions to punt. It's 4th and 2 and 4th and 3, either go for it or you're at the 40 something yard line. Like it's a long kick, but you're indoors and Joey Sly has a bazooka leg. Like let him rip one. Or both of them. It's 60 yards, but like, okay, he's hit 61 this year. Let him do it. And so I think finding ways to be threatening and get big plays and do more than like, hey, look, they'll move it on you between the 20s, but actually really even from like the -20 to the +40, but they'll stall out because we can turn up the heat and we know we can get a sack if we need to knock them out of field goal range. It just feels very predictable that that's going to be the outcome so often in these games. And they got to find ways to break some of these tendencies, break some of the rhythms, and ultimately strike and score points as touchdowns outside of how they've done it recently, which is like Sam creates something off schedule and Brian Robinson runs 50 yards down the sideline.
Yeah, no, I think that's a group point. And again, to EB's credit, or to kind of maybe give a different perspective, because I think we both, both of us agree that we'd probably get to these shot plays in different ways. Our offense would be a little bit different than EB's if we were calling it. But like for example, the first down, I think that should have been an explosive play. Then on the touchdown drive.
And to be clear, that's not a criticism of EB specifically.
No.
That's not saying he's not calling it well, or like there's no. I'm like, the offense, everybody from EB to the position coaches to the players needs to find a way to do this, because this is a problem I have identified. That is what I do. It's their job to fix it.
Right. And I think, like, so for example, like I left the game kind of with, and in the instant reaction, like you can go back and watch it. I think we both kind of felt the same way. But then on the touchdown drive, there's that PI. Do you remember on that 3rd and 1 to Curtis Samuel? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Right. And so like that's a play where it's a nothing play. It's like a totally benign. Everyone forgets it. PI, first down, who cares? But when you go back and watch it, they basically set up like a roll pass with like a tight end, like what they would call like a tight end delay. But instead of the tight end doing it, Curtis is going to do it. And if number 6 doesn't grab Curtis right there, that's a touchdown. Yep. And it's an explosive play in the offense. And those plays are kind of sprinkled in throughout. There's like opportunities where you're like, oh man, if like, especially late, there was, gosh, I forget the exact sequence. It might've been the 2-minute. I'll have to check my notes. I don't want to go through all of it, but they basically are running like a sit by the tight end, a corner by the receiver. And then Pringle is running an angle across the field. Right. And they catch these guys in a beautiful cover 2 shell, and the cover 2 safety beelines for the corner, and he's late to the corner, but they drop Pringle. Pringle is wide open. So if I'm coaching the read, and I'm sure it's just like, if the tight end's there, take it. But I think you're probably coaching a high-low in terms of, does the guy take the tight end or does he fall into the corner? And then if I'm sure they want you to kind of read that safety, if the safety's attacking the corner and it's cover 2, throw the angle. And if you hit that, and Patrick Mahomes gets through that progression, because he's been in the offense for 10 years or whatever the hell it is, but that is an explosive play. That's one where you're saying that's on ESPN, that's the highlight reel, and you're saying there's 3 explosive plays where you probably, like, that's a 70-yard touchdown. The first one's a 60-yard touchdown. The one to Curtis is probably a 45, 50-yard touchdown. And that's 150 yards of offense on 3 plays if you get to the right read. So there's an element of that too, where it's like they can't find explosive plays, but when you go back with the clicker, and this isn't like with Scott last year, where it's like if you squint your eyes and they make a perfect throw, like this is a touchdown. It's like, if you just read this out and you understand what the defense is doing here, like that's a huge play. It's a huge play, and it looks very much like what they're doing in Kansas City. So I think there's probably a little bit of frustration, from that standpoint, is that Sam is doing an excellent job. Right, he's doing it. I think we're both very high on Sam, but in terms of maximizing what this offense gives you and getting through some of that mental gymnastics stuff, I'm not sure that it's all the way there, especially in this game. And now I got to say this too: that's not entirely on Sam. You said they had how many pressures in this game? 35 or some crazy number. Like you can tell his process was accelerated. For sure, and so he's not going to be able to read this out the way we want him to read it out all the time. So that's another thing I got to say.
Yeah, so that actually, I'm glad you brought up the high-low stuff, because that's something Romo talked about in the broadcast that I think is interesting, and an area where Sam, like kind of one of his next growth steps that I'll be watching over the next 5 games, is Romo talked about how Sam, like a lot of young quarterbacks do this, and you, on high-low reads, ideally, you look high to throw low, because you want to drop that defender off, and what Romo said, which I thought was really smart, is let's say it's a 14-yard bench route or whatever, and then you got some kind of quick out or whatever, maybe it's a comeback, whatever underneath it, right? But there's something at 6 yards or something at 14. And often you stare down that short one as a young quarterback to try to open up the 14-yarder. And if you actually just reverse the process and you look at the 14-yarder to draw that defender back and then quickly throw the 6, that 6-yard guy winds up running for another couple of yards, and it actually winds up being a 10-yard gain, and you don't really wind up missing that much yardage. I think to finish out that thought, though, the other thing that happens is, like, let's take the play you just talked about. You look high to throw low. You realize, oh, that safety is buzzed over.
Right.
Maybe that angle route's there, and you wind up getting to make the third read, if you will, in the progression. But, like, those are the kinds of mental processing things and the order of operations that, as Sam grows and gets more experience and cleans it up, you might see big plays get generated.
Yeah, and I think, like, to your point, it's all stylistic. It's all, like, because you mentioned Tony Romo doing the high-low, looking high to throw low.
Yeah.
Matt Ryan used to do, I swear to you, he used to do this. Like, we'd run it's CO, right? So it's a corner and an out.
Right.
CO.
Yep.
Right. And so I'd always run the out because I'm not fast enough to run a corner. And what he would do is he'd look at the corner like you're talking about, like turn his head visibly back to the out. The guy would break on the out and he'd throw the corner. Like, so just understanding, I think, to your point, like that kind of maturation of saying, hey, I am manipulating the defense. I'm taking what the defense is giving me, but I'm also dictating with my vision and my body posture certain throws. And I think that's something that I think we're both excited to see. Can he develop in this area? Because there are throws, there are opportunities. You're like, and there was another one, man. There was another one where they're running CO drive. So it's corner, out, and then they're running drive. So Terry's running across, and then they got a dig or a basic behind that. And so they match the CO, and he tries to force a throw to Logan Thomas when Terry is wide open across the middle. And that progression should just take you there. It's like, hey, I don't like this, let's hit the drive right over the ball. And that's really, really challenging to do. But if you hit Terry over the ball, that's a 15-yard gain. And like, you don't see him not get that completion, but that's so, so important for maximizing what this offense can do. And I think that's something that I'd like to see him develop at. And it's hard. Against Dallas, it's going to be really hard to do that because they create so much pressure and they're so tied to the coverage. But there were throws and opportunities there if you could work through the progression. Now, the question is, if you were to talk to Sam, is can he do that? Did he feel like he had enough time? But there are opportunities where you're like, if I'm EB, I'm like, God, like, this is dead. This is where the ball's got to go. Or that's what we talked about all week. Throw the ball right there. And and that's tough. That's
Yeah.
tough. That's tough doing. But again, he's
Welcome
a
to
young
the
player
league.
who but he also made big plays too in his own right, and deserves a lot of credit for those. So I'm not saying he played badly. It's just
right. Well, that's the thing is like I feel like so much of the offense they created was like Sam off schedule or Sam shifting and jiving in the pocket and dumping something off sidearm, and like it just didn't feel like there was a ton of stuff that happened in rhythm in this game. And the stuff that did happen was like, again, non-threatening. It's like, okay, they take what the defense give you, and they tackle well in space, so it's 3 yards. Cool. And finding ways to generate big plays, and this is something that we'll talk about again to circle back to Miami, who's so freaking impressive offensively. Miami generates big plays in the run game because they scheme it up, and they are like, we're gonna get you. And Washington doesn't do that. And then in the on the passing side of it, like there are chances, but you have to be able to block it up. You have to be able to read it out, and they haven't done that in weeks and weeks and weeks. And hopefully they can get a couple over this final 5 weeks of the season.
And that'd be interesting to talk to somebody about that, I think, because it's like what is this is there, but what's the likelihood of it being there versus Dallas? Because I think that's the thing is like, can he work the progression with this rush, and that rush is fun, man. It's a fun rush to watch. They do a great job. They got a whole bunch of guys who can rush the passer. So it's there. Realistically, it's close to being there in timing, but it's also like, what's the percentage that we're going to hit this, in this situation versus this look that Dallas is presenting us. And I think maybe Dan Quinn in Dallas knows that too. It's like, get that corner, because this is the third thing in the progression. And if he gets there, good for him. And we'll take a 60-yard touchdown. But if not, like we think our rush is going to get home. So I think there's an element of that too that needs to be acknowledged as well. So.
All right, so here's what the rest of the season, to an extent, looks like. Like, we're still going to do film reviews. We're still going to do previews, but we're going to obviously try to do something special during the bye week, have a guest on, talk about some bigger things moving forward. But also, we'll kind of start doing some of the types of things we just did. Like, okay, what does this mean for the progression of this player? So we'll start to dive into some of kind of the in-house evaluation, as obviously this season, for practical purposes in terms of playoffs, et cetera, is over. But there's a lot of potential here, and I think it's going to be a fun offseason. But we'll play it out as we have to with these 5 games remaining. So plenty to look forward to. Still keep listening. Still keep watching. And Logan apparently has something to say because he gave me the old one finger up.
Yeah, one thing. So if there's if listeners, if there's people that you want us to watch, please leave a comment. We can focus on some of those guys that are like, maybe you're like, oh, how's Percy Butler doing? Or St. Juice with the new system, or whoever it is. Leave those comments and we'll try to focus in on those guys when we're watching film and stuff. So
yeah, and I will say, obviously, people are going to ask about Sam and like, hey, we got the 4th pick, or we got the 6th pick because this happened around the league, and as it moves, like, would you take this guy? Would you take Caleb Williams, Drake May, on down the list over staying with Sam Howell? We'll get there. I think that with Sam, it's going to be a progression, but like we'll consistently update it to make a more definitive, declarative statement. We're going to have to see where the draft pick is and how Sam finishes out this year.
And just so we don't do our draft stuff, or at least I don't do mine. I don't know when you start yours, Greg, till the last couple of games of the year. So I haven't even looked at the quarterbacks yet, but that'll be part of everything when we get there. So
yeah, so excited to do that for sure. But definitely, give us some non-Howell people, because one, we want to know who you want, and two, we'll be talking about Sam, even if it's not specifically like here's where he fits on our quarterback board, because we got to do the rest of the quarterback board first. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to Take Command, and we'll see you later this week for a preview of the Dolphins game. Oh boy, that'll be fun. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.